This is the last week of my Mindfulness in the Brain course, and I was going to do a summary video for my class, trying to put 15 weeks into 15 minutes. And then I thought, why not just do a video for my YouTube channel and share it with everyone? So we're really going to try to go through 15 weeks in the next 15 minutes. And I'm just going to kind of hit on the highlights because going through all the details obviously would take too long. So it might sound a little disorganized because it's just hard to put it all into one simple short video. So we start off with the definition of mindfulness. And so the definition of mindfulness, the classic definition, is to purposely pay attention in the present moment without judgment. And so if you can really just focus on that definition through the day, or just remind yourself once in a while, am I purposely paying attention right now in this moment? And am I doing it non-judgmentally? Well, really what mindfulness is it's about waking up to reality. Instead of thinking so much, we're actually doing what we're doing and we're at where we're at instead of mentally projecting ourselves into some, what we thought the past was or what we think the future will be. And I called the class Mindfulness in the Brain because we use the brain kind of as a way to validate these different techniques. And so the neuroscience is actually pretty simple. I break it down to just a few parts of the brain, like the amygdala, which is involved in that fight or flight response, or being, the kind of alerting response. The hippocampus, which is involved in memory, the frontal lobe, which is involved in decision making, and the cortex, that kind of wrinkled outer layering of the brain that has all of the neurons. These are the information processing cells of the brain. And also, the cortex is separated. We have a left and right side of the brain. That's, if you've ever seen pictures of the brain, that's one of the more obvious parts. And so these all play a different role, but when you try to simplify it, it's like the brain has kind of an alerting system, that fight or flight, kind of getting us ready for action. And it also has that rest and digest system, that kind of calming us down and letting us know that everything's okay. And of course, in our culture, the big problem is we've kind of got the alerting system on far too much, and we've got the kind of rest and digest system. For some people, it never turns on. And so that's what I kind of break the class down into, trying to bring some balance. So we have kind of, we have to be alert, we have to do things and quote, get things done. But we also need that time to rest and that time to feel relaxed and feel safe and the kind of downtime mentally and spiritually. And so we start off with emotional IQ, sometimes called EQ. And that's really important because so much of our days are filled with emotions that we have a very difficult time. Some people, they don't even have an understanding of their emotions. And so it's an interesting field, a very new idea over the last 10 or 20 years about thinking about our capacity to manage our emotions, to understand our emotions, as actually a form of intelligence. And one of the things that people get out of being mindful is a new take on how to manage their emotions. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have emotions, and I think Alan Watts put it really well when he said there are no wrong emotions. So whatever emotion, there may be wrong actions, and you don't want to act on any of them. But most of us, we're set in such a battle trying to control our emotions. We don't really understand that that's not the way it works. Think about an infant. When an infant's born, it just has this kind of free flow of emotions. And being mindful, part of mindfulness practices is accepting these emotions. Remember, the last part of the definition is to avoid judgment of what's happening this moment. So maybe there's anger. There it is. If you judge it and say, I shouldn't be feeling like this, then you're not being mindful. What is meditation? We spend a lot of time on this because it sounds kind of, like it could be complex, and actually it's the least complex thing. It doesn't make it easy though. In meditation, you're focusing on one thing at a time. Now, the standard, most traditional thing to focus on is the breath. And the cool thing about breathing, of course, is that we've been breathing ever since we were born. But for most of us, it's a completely unconscious process. So breathing is one of those interesting things that you can actually bring into your conscious awareness and become aware of it. And some of our breathing strategies were as simple as just being aware of your breath. We did a couple kind of more trendy things like box breathing. You may have heard of it, where you breathe in for 4, you hold it for 4, breathe out for 4, and then hold it, and then another breathe in for 4, and you kind of start over. So it's just kind of, a cycle. And that's, we throw out a lot of these different practices, and for some people, some work better than others. So the trick is to find which, like a buffet, you're just kind of trying to pick out which ones work for you. Another, one of my favorites, I picked up from Andrew Weil like 20 years ago. It's called 4-7-8 breathing. And this is when you breathe in for 4, you hold for 7 seconds, and then you breathe out for 8. Now the trick with that is it's really getting into those two systems I talked about. So we have this kind of fight or flight, and then we have this rest and digest system. When you breathe in, you're kicking in the alerting system, and when you breathe out, you're kicking in the rest and digest system. And so by doubling the out breath, you're actually bringing a little bit more balance, so that rest system is getting cranked up a little bit more than the alerting system. And so, some people even skip the middle one. So they'll just breathe in for 4 and then breathe out for 8. And so you're doubling the out breath, and that can be really important. One last thing about breathing is a very fascinating thing that came up with the research is that when you analyze all the different chanting and meditations across different cultures in the world, which is, we all do this, no matter what place in the globe you look, people are meditating or chanting or doing something like this. And there's a remarkable consistency with this, where people are breathing in for about 5.5 seconds, or let's just say 6. They breathe in for 6 seconds, and then you breathe out for 6. And so there's something about that, and I tell the students to whatever form of meditation they're doing, and I'll explain a few more as we go through the video, just sort of work on that, whatever you're doing. If you're cutting the grass, if you're going for a walk, just try to work on getting in for 5 or 6 seconds and then breathing out for 5 or 6 seconds. It would be a remarkable coincidence if all these different cultures on the planet that were engaging in these mindful and meditation and prayers, that was just a amazing coincidence. Again, you can focus on the breath, but some of the students really enjoyed the body scanning. And so if you've gotten into some forms of meditation, the body scan is something that comes up, and it's very popular. And again, we're focusing on one thing at a time, but instead of the breathing, you just focus on one body part at a time. So, and in the simplest body scan, you start, say, with the feet, and you just let your consciousness focus on a part of your body that most people neglect almost the entire day. And how often are you conscious of your feet? Usually we're thinking and engaged in some abstraction. So you make it really simple, like I said, reality therapy. Wherever you're at, you're there. And then so you're focusing on your feet. And then you maybe move up to the legs, thighs, hips, and then, torso, and you just move all the way up, one body part at a time. And the body scan, a lot of students enjoyed that. It's a nice one because it's not a technical one, and you can do it anywhere. And just even with my simple description of it, it works. And the interesting thing they're finding with all this research is that they keep shortening the amount of time that you have to do these practices. So at first it was like, well, I have to go to a 6 or 8 week mindfulness training course, and that was what the experiment was about. Now they got it down to a weekend, and then some of the studies are finding like 10 minutes, like I did in a recent video, 10 minutes of silence can actually rewire the brain to a significant degree. Maybe the most popular practice we did was a day where we did mindful eating. And it was a little unusual because we were doing it online. Usually we're in the classroom. But mindful eating, it's exactly what it sounds like. Instead of, think about what we typically do when we eat. We have the television on, or we're having a conversation. We're doing the exact opposite of mindfulness. We're mindless, and so you look down at a pizza box and it's gone, and you didn't even have the enjoyment of consciously eating it. So the practice of mindful eating is exactly as it sounds. Now sometimes we would start really slow, and it would take, the classic thing in psych is to take like a raisin, but you could do this with any food. And you just start off by observing, smelling, touching, really getting the full sensory experience. Then you maybe have a small taste, and then you get every thing you can get out of that one taste. And the class was amazed by it because one, they felt so much, gives your brain time to process what you're eating, so you feel full much sooner than if you just jam 1,200 calories down. Um, so that's a really great practice. And another thing that's cool about it is you don't have to read a lot of books. I gave you really the simplest version of it. So next time you're eating, or you can do tea, coffee. You could probably do mindful drinking. If you sipped a glass of wine, you could probably even do it with that. Um, then we moved things over to moving meditations, and we did yoga, and that's another one. Sometimes people make yoga sound really complex, but if you look up like the sun salutation, um, and one of my favorites was Steve Ross, and I picked up his yoga 20 some years ago, and he actually has music playing in the background. You say, well, it doesn't sound real, authentic, and it isn't really, even though he was trained very authentically. But the whole trick with yoga is, again, getting into your body. I mean, yoga means union, so it's really getting out of your kind of sense of ego and thinking about you all the time, and just getting more into what it feels like to be in a body. So these movements are they're not complex, and you can do them really at almost any level of health. Then we move things to a little more complex. We did Tai Chi for a little bit. Tai Chi is different because it can take quite a bit of training, but the really interesting thing, it's less popular, is Qi Kong. And Qi Kong is a very closely related to Tai Chi, but the movements are much more simple. And it's still a form of moving meditation. So some people like the moving meditation because just sitting there, focusing on their breath, doesn't work for them. So in Qi Kong, it's again very much focused on the breath, but the hands kind of move along with it, and it's just simply just raising the hands in the in breath and then sinking them down on the down breath. And sometimes it can be a little more complex, where you're kind of like lifting the knees so you're standing straight, and then as you go down, you're kind of bending the knees a little bit. But Qigong, when you get into the research between yoga, Tai Chi, and Qigong, it's absolutely remarkable. There were so many studies that I could not cover these, even over the course of the semester. There are hundreds of scientific studies, and they do these randomized controlled trials, which is a very important part of science, where you randomly assign people to different conditions, so you know that the effects are, pretty. You can really trust them. And it's interesting because Eckhart Tolle, if you're familiar with The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle, I think it was in New Earth, he was talking about how Tai Chi and Qi Kong would play a major role in the awakening. And of course, what Eckhart's talking about is awakening from the dream of thinking, the thinking mind. And that's what mindfulness is all about. I mean, thinking is a great tool, but you just want to use it when it's useful. And the problem for so many of us is we've gotten into the thinking mind, and that's all we do. We think. And we're never where we're at, and we're never doing what we're doing. So we actually spent a whole week on The Power of Now, which is a very interesting form of mindfulness too. It's actually the same thing. I mean, that's why Eckhart got so popular. He was able to bring mindfulness in to a large audience without filling it up with a bunch of terminology. And of course, being in the moment is what mindfulness is all about. And the power of now is the power of being mindful and being where you're at, rather than thinking all the time. And we left the course the last couple of weeks. We've been working on a bunch of really powerful forms of meditation that all shift from, the inner world, me, to the outer world. And again, something far more real. And so, in the sense of like this ego thing, which is just a creation of the mind. And we started on gratitude, and the practices of gratitude and kindness were just so powerful for the students. In some cases, it can be almost overwhelming. And I just did a video on kindness recently, but the research on this is showing again, these practices are some of the best ways to keep your brain young. And so when you look at how the cells, those neurons, those processing cells of the brain age, there's this massive cell death. Particularly when you get to be 50, it's really noticeable. Well, what all these practices, whether it was Tai Chi, Qigong, or practicing kindness or gratitude, all these practices seem to preserve the brain and keep it youthful. And I think that's because the brain is great at thinking. Um, the thinking mind is an amazing gift, but we don't want to be possessed by it. We don't want it to, it's like a hammer. It's great for putting in a nail, but it's not good to sleep on. It's not, it doesn't do everything. And so the thinking mind is a great place to visit. But the problem is we don't want to stay there, at least not for a very long time. So mindfulness brings us back to these non-thinking, non-intellectual aspects of being in the real world. And that's why we left the class with Zen. And of course, Zen, for some people, sounds really complex, but it's exactly the opposite. Zen is another form of reality therapy where they throw out these koans, these paradoxes that just trip up the thinking mind and help you be who you actually are. They help us practice to be spontaneous. And that sounds, a little bit of a paradox, but so much of Zen is. And, the idea is that, think about nature. Nature is continuously spontaneous because nature isn't thinking about what it's going to do next. The trees don't think, they shed their leaves. So it's all just beautiful spontaneity. And the human condition has gotten tied in with our thinking mind is always, well, what should I do next? I don't know. We're so confused now. Like we don't really even know what to eat anymore. We don't know how to sleep. And so Zen helps us kind of it's a nice kind of way, at least I think, to end the class because it helps us identify the thinking mind for what it is, a useful tool. But the trick to finding our own spontaneity, the trick to finding our own true nature, is to recognize that we are not the thinking mind. And when you practice mindfulness and you just do these simple things, for me, again, the one conscious breath for me is always a go-to thing. So throughout the day, just even once a day, I'll just stop, take one conscious breath, and that brings you back to reality. And you can, again, just go over the definition of mindfulness. Just remember, are you where you're at? Are you doing what you're doing? Are you purposely paying attention to what's happening right now without judgment? And so that's, I think I did it. I went a couple minutes over, but that was pretty close. And that was 15 or so weeks. And of course, I left some out, but leave something in the comments if you think I skipped over a really important mindfulness practice or something that was really helpful. If you do this kind of thing with other people, if you're doing it on your own, let me know. And I hope you enjoyed that.